Tēnā rā tātou, e ngā taringa pīkari, nau mai piki mai rā ki tō tātou nei hōtaka ako. Ko tangata tiriti tēnei e mihi kawana kia koutou kei ngā hauewha e mihi kawana. Tēnei, tētehi o ngā manuwhiri, kua tai mai nei, no Ngāti Maniapoto, no Ngāti Mahanga. Nā reira, e te mokopuna o Tainui Waka, tēnei mātou e mihi kawana kia koe i tēnei o ngā ahi nei. Ka hoki ngā mahara ki te tongi kura o tō tūpuna o Rewi Maniapoto, kia mau tonu ki tēnā, kia mau ki te kāwau, māro whanake ake, whanake ake. Nā reira, ko koe tērā e te rangatira, i roto i ngā tau nei, ko koe tērā e whanake ake, i ngā auatanga o ngā kura me ngā hāpori whānui. Nā reira, e te tumuaki, e te rangatira, kei te mihi tēnei o mātou o tangata tiriti kia koe. It's wonderful for all of you to have joined us today for a great conversation with my guy here, Robin Fabrish, a proud descendant of Tainui Waka, and the embodiment of some of I guess, the taonga, the different proverbs, the different provocations that his ancestors have left us to really stay true to and persevere for what is right. And so today we're going to be having a good freestyle, a good organic free-range conversation, Robin, about how you interpret this idea of te tiriti-based leadership in a secondary school or in school education generally. Kei a koe tērā e te tuakana. So for those of you who don't know Robin, you'll get to know him very, very shortly, but he's a tūmuaki of Tamatea High School. He's been involved in education for 20 plus years. He's a proud papa. He's Ngāti Maniapoto and Ngāti Mahanga connections and a lot of other connections around the world. He's currently a PhD student at Waipapa Taumatarau, University of Auckland, and his PhD is on te tiriti based leadership in a mainstream secondary school. And so when we've been thinking about this program of conversations, I thought this would be awesome to connect with you, Robin. And I remember the first time I met you was in Kahununu territory, and really enjoyed the teacher only day we shared. And then since then saw you at the Koronehana, and we've just stayed in touch. And so welcome and thank you for your time. Kei a koe te wāehoa, tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe, Alex, ngā mihi nui ki a koe, nau mihi mai ki a mātou, mātou no Tainui Waka, so ai tikatau, Ngāti Maniapoto, Ngāti Mahanga hoki tōku whānau, he hono ngā whakapono hoki i tō mātou ki Parihaka, no reira i te wā o ngā poropiti e rua ara ko tohu rawa ko te whiti i haere tōku whānau, ki Parihaka ki te tautoko i te kaupapa, no reira, e tino hono ngā tō mātou ki Parihaka hoki. No reira, mihi kawana ki a koe. Thank you very much for your introduction and acknowledgement. And looking forward to this kōrero about leadership in our kura around Te Tiriti o Waitangi.
You know, what's cool, Robin, is it's hard to find people who get so excited as you. When we're talking about these issues, most people want to run away when they think of Te Tiriti-based leadership. But that's why I've enjoyed connecting with you and getting to know more about your work and your whānau and what you do. So let's kick it off then with this key question. If a school were to come to you, a secondary school, mainstream, Pākehā school were to come to you and ask the question, you know, Robin, what is this thing called Te Tiriti-based leadership? And how do we do it? What would you tell them?
Yeah. Well, I just want to acknowledge what you're saying there too about most people want to run away from the treaty, Te Tiriti, that whole stuff, because I know that space too. It's only recently that when I've had the time to actually get my head around, well, what does this mean? That I haven't been kind of running away or ducking and diving a little bit. And it is something that requires an investment of time to understand what it does mean. And so if someone came to me asking that question, I'd be interested to know whether what their motivation is, whether they're motivated by the moral imperative, and therefore what understanding do they have around that, or are they motivated by the fact that the 2020 Education and Training Act requires or recognises that one of the primary responsibilities that boards and schools have is to give practical effect to Te Tiriti o Waitangi. Because that can be if it's kind of a compliance, well, we better do this because then that changes the pathway to follow, really. Because I don't think you can have one without the other. Well, no, maybe you can. You don't have to have deeply understand the legal requirements if you understand the moral imperative around Te Tiriti and giving effect to Te Tiriti in our schools. But I don't think you can just follow the legal without understanding why that's important. So I suppose that's where I would start. And just to explain a bit more about that, perhaps, when I talk about the moral imperative, I really enjoyed an article that you wrote, you and your colleagues. I think it was published recently or late last year. And in there was a little, it was talking about the conference I think you ran. And in there you talked about Te Tiriti and basically the 5 elements that it was about. We want to have a relationship. The first article is about kawanatanga, second article about rangatiratanga, third article about mana orite, and then the 5th part, and I'm not sure if this is what you wrote, but it's what I have in my head, is about recognition of religious freedom.
Yeah.
And that's the guts of Te Tiriti, really, and that's what most of our tipuna signed up to at Waitangi and at subsequent places around the motu. And so if we're wanting to give practical effect to that, and we're not talking about the treaty, because the treaty was a translation which said in some ways the opposite to what Te Tiriti is talking about, but we're in a context now where the government recognises that Te Tiriti is the document that we're wanting to give effect to. And so therefore, understanding, first of all, those 5 things that are in Te Tiriti, so that's what we've signed up for, and then taking the time to understand, so what does that mean for us in our schools? Because it took me quite a while to get my head around what it does mean. And one of the things that really helped me with that is understanding Mason Jury's kōrero. He's basically saying that after 13 years in public education, Māori graduates, we want them to graduate strong in te ao Māori, strong in te ao whānui, healthy and prosperous. So a good, deep understanding of the Māori world, a really deep and strong understanding of the wider world, healthy and prosperous. And I'm thinking, well, who wouldn't want that? And really, to my mind, that's what Te Tiriti was about. Saying, you fellas, we're going to make sure that you still have everything that's important to you in terms of your mātauranga and way of being in the world. We're going to share everything about our way of being in the world. And we want to make sure you're healthy and prosperous so that everybody benefits. And so if I think about that, okay, what does strong in te ao Māori for a graduate of our school look like? Then start unpacking that. And that gets to be really really quite cool and exciting, because how we've done that is we've talked to the students, we've talked to our whānau, we've talked to our hapu, we've talked to our kaiako, and said, okay, strong and Te Ao Māori, what does that actually mean? What does it look like?
Mm.
And sometimes they start off with, oh, well, you know, getting NCA and going to university. Going, well, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Or is that kind of the Western framework? You know, because we want that. But what about strong and Te Ao Māori? And it's stuff like, to my mind, when my mokopuna have been through 13 years of education in, you know, a kura auraki, I would want them to be able to whai kōrero, karanga, set up the marae, do the hāngi, be able to explain about matariki and the maramataka, you know the pūrākau, know their whakapapa, know the kōrero about our waka and our tipuna, be fluent in te reo and everything about that. Confident as a kapahaka performer, not that they have to, you know, it's not a measure of being Māori that you have to do kapahaka, but if I need to do a waiata tautoko, I can. Or if I need to pull out a haka, I can. I don't have to be going to Matatini to be Māori, you know, but if that's a pathway I want to go to, I can go and do that. And so those are some of the aspects of what I would say would be strong in Te Ao Māori. And then in Te Ao Whānui, we want everything else too. We want it all for our mokopuna. So, to my mind, someone comes to me and asks me about that. First of all, we've got to understand the moral imperative, understand the why, understand colonization, understand, you know, racism, and then know that, you know, what strong and Te Ao Māori looks like in their context.
Yeah.
And then make that happen.
Kia ora. That's awesome. What were some of the when you were I like that real practical element of what does strong mean in Te Ao Māori for your local community? What were some of the things that came up from each group? Because you talked about young people, well, rangatahi, whānau, teachers. I'm not sure whether they were involved in that process, but
yeah.
What were some of the key things that came up there that surprised you, or that I mean, you already said, you know, some come forward and say we want them to go to uni and get NCA, like that's a given, but you were saying you kind of stretched that out. So that whole process of asking is not naive, is not just oh, we're just going to go out and ask. There's always going to be a bit of a dance, bit of a tension going on there, right? Because they might come back with stuff that you might not agree with, or
no, that's right.
Yeah. So what did you notice?
Well, and I mean, you know, that, you know, they go to the get a good job or go to university, get qualifications, and I'm going, well, yes, but to my mind, that's not specifically Māori.
Right.
You know, it's like, and that, so you kind of take that away and say, yeah, okay, yeah, we know that, but what does success as Māori look like in our context? Yes, it's NCA, yes, good job, blah, 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 but there's nothing necessarily specifically Māori about those things.
You could do that in Australia or Canada or the States.
Yeah, that's right, exactly, yeah. So then it comes back to, wow, well, we'd like to be able to be fluent in te reo. We'd like to be able to do the whai kōrero and the karanga. And we'd like to be able to do the karakia.
Yeah.
We like to know these stories about our tipuna and our whakapapa. Understand that. Because, you know, there's a lot of our mainstream kids who look at kura kids and go, wow, they've got the reo and they can do kapas and they can do all this stuff. And why can't we have that too? You know, I have the saying that, you know, if I could wave a magic wand and make you fluent in te reo, would you want that? I don't know anyone who say no.
Yeah. I was working in a school a few years ago, 10 now, and we were doing we had a whānau wānanga with some young people, Māori, all Māori, rangatahi nei, and this issue came up on what is Māori, what does it mean to be Māori. We didn't phrase it like you did, but it was quite a shock really to hear them say, you know, we're not Māori enough because we don't do kapahaka, we don't have a good wakaama team. Our teachers only you know, doing te reo once a week, and she's still learning. And the kids up the road, there's this wharekura literally 15 k's up the road, they're the real Māori. And what broke my heart about that was this whole notion of what is a real Māori, and this whole authentic notion of Māori, and how they even though they had whakapapa to that place, to that whenua, they were from the marae, literally 5 minutes down the road, they didn't feel connected enough to that place. Yeah. So could you talk a little bit about, like, at your school, how you're making that happen and connect to place? Because that's one of the major things at the moment with the Aotearoa histories curriculum, with place-based ed, with the changes, the review. It's very much localizing, placing it into whenua and what we're learning from the whenua. What are you doing there in relation to that question, and bringing it back down to where you are?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole heap of stuff that's happening in our school at multiple levels, which I think is important to get sustainable change. And I was at a conference recently, the Secondary Principals Association New Zealand conference, ran a workshop on giving practical effect to tiriti in our kura, in our mainstream kura. I know. I know. And you know, we talked about te tiriti, and I shared some stuff about what we were doing at our school, and then shared a Google Doc with them, basically with a whole, you know, a number of columns, different headings, and asked them what they were doing in each of those areas. And the first column was beliefs and attitudes. And it's interesting that there was, I think, 5 or 6 comments in there about things like challenging deficit theorizing and people knowing that this is how we do stuff at our school. But I think one of the key things is that people have got to deeply understand the why, like understand the impact of colonization, and that the challenges we have in society now come as a result of, you know, land confiscations and racism and policy that has said for 150 years or more, Māori are second best. And, you know, we carry that with us. So, you know, I think to get change, you've got to have people be cognizant of, you know, that's the problem, and that's the issue that we're addressing.
It's funny. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Well, I was just thinking, when people write deficit theorizing, it's kind of like we've read that, we've heard about it. But what you're kind of saying is, well, why is there deficit theory? What's its root? Kind of digging into some of the root causes of that. That's what I'm hearing you.
Totally.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I saw Hannah O'Regan spoke at the conference, and she took us on the journey of, you know, from the treaty through to, and all the things, major things that happened, which, you know, stripped us of our land, dispossessed us of our economic base, and then just gave us all those messages about, you know, you guys are pretty awesome for Indigenous people, but you're still second best to us British. And, you know, the hangover from that now, we still see. And so we've got to be conscious that that's the context we're in, and those are the invisible forces that are pervasive. So I think, starting from that is really important.
Right.
And then next column was looking at, okay, boards of trustees, what's happening at that board level and the strategic, and it's good that you've got an iwi representative or a hapu representative or a Māori on the board, but what does the rest of the board know about the history of why we're in this mess, and therefore what we need to do, and about the Education and Training Act, about the NELPs? What are they, are they all aligned about? Yes, did they get the moral imperative? And therefore, are we allocating the resourcing that we need to give practical effect to Te Tiriti o Waitangi? Or is Te Reo 3 hours a week? Because that's not going to get us to the promise of Te Tiriti. And then, so looking at the leadership team, the tumuaki, the senior leaders, and, a lot of them talk about, I'm learning Te Reo, I'm leading karakia, I'm using it, which is great, modeling those kinds of things. And some of them talk about appointing Māori DP, to lead this kind of stuff, which is great also, so long as there's plenty of support. And so long as it's not, well, okay, here you go, honey, you go and sort that out for us. Everybody's got to be in the waka. And then, working through the teachers, where are the teachers at with this stuff, and curriculum. I was really interested in this, some of this data that I gathered, that when we were talking about curriculum, most of the principals wrote about, we've got Te Reo, we've got Rumaki, we've got compulsory year 9, 10 Te Reo, we've got kapahaka, and that was it. And I'm going, that's a pretty narrow vision of curriculum. And that's not going to get our kids strong into our Māori. That's good. Yes, we like that. But what about the other curriculum areas? In chemistry, are we learning about harakeke and the dyeing process, and how traditionally that worked, and how we can analyze and explain it using a Western scientific, model? And that's not to say that, it denigrates anything. It's just, okay, let's look at the best of both worlds with that. And, are we looking at, that longitudinal Dunedin study? What's the stuff in there about Māori that we can use to analyze as part of our learning about statistics? So how can we use these contexts when we're looking at Te Ao Whānui? How can we overlap that with Te Ao Māori, so that we're accelerating the learning that we've got in Mātauranga Māori and Mātauranga Whānui? Yeah. So I think those kinds of conversations are important. And then you've got the physical, how does the school look? I mean, Anne Milne has done some really good stuff around what she calls auditing the white spaces. Our phone message is a minute long and it's bilingual. All our signage, our website, we've got, Te Reos everywhere, which is awesome. And that in some ways, that's an easy thing to do. It costs money, but you've also got to make sure that it's lined up with stuff happening in the boardroom, and the strategic plans, and that's all got to be lined up. And then looking at how are we working with whānau, how are we working with hapu, what are our akonga saying, how are we using their voice to inform our programs and what we're doing. So yeah, it's probably a 5-year plan at least. What were some of the challenges you've come up against, or in creating this vision, making sure that the vision is linked to action? Because that's what I'm hearing. It's great to have a bilingual website and te mea, or a whakatauki and a kōrero, which I've looked at your website, it's all there. And then what you're saying is make it actionable in the classroom, through the pedagogy, through the content. So those rich learning conditions are there, both for Te Ao Pākehā, or Te Ao Whānui pēr, me te mātauranga Māori. What have been some of the, or maybe I'll be more specific,
often when I'm working in schools, teachers come through with a couple of things. Oh, I already do that. I already do it. I already integrate Mate Rangamari with Western science. I'm like, oh, do you really? I already do it, or I've got no time. Those are two big things that come up. I'm not sure whether those have come up in your school, but what are some ways of addressing the challenges of trying to create a learning environment that you're talking about, getting the visibility, the public position alongside what's going on in and outside of the class?
Yeah,
What are some of the challenges and the opportunities? Because there's
yeah,
opportunities in that too. If you wouldn't
yeah,
mind just sharing some of what you've experienced.
yeah. I know some people talk about resistant people resistant to change, those kinds of things. And one of my supervisors, Deirdre Lefevre, has written about challenge that notion of resistance with the suggestion that people are risk adverse,
Mm,
and often fear is a big motivator for not jumping on the waka.
mm,
And so, just like kids, right? Kids don't want to get involved with learning because I'm going to look like an idiot
mm,
or I won't be good at it. And so, the question that I have is, how do I scaffold our kayako so that the steps are baby steps
right.
and they can succeed while they're taking them, as opposed to a big leap
Yeah.
that could look like they're going to fall flat on their face and have, the biggest fear is that the Maori kids will laugh at them because they've tried something and it just has come across as yeah.
Yeah.
So and one of the things that I can say just to illustrate that is that in briefing, we used to have briefing every morning. Now we have it 3 times a week with the staff, and in that briefing we've learned waiata aringa,
Mm,
and to the extent now that there's probably 3 waiata aringa that our staff can jump up without any notice and perform as a waiata tautoko or a way of celebrating. So maybe at an end of term assembly or at a prize giving, the whole staff are up there showing that they can give appreciation in a way that's consistent with tikanga, and we've scaffolded them to be able to do that.
right.
And that builds their confidence. So yes, I'm happy to stand up and do this. And the te reo in the classroom is a bit more of a challenge
Mm,
because walkthroughs we don't hear as much as we would like
mm-hmm.
being used in an authentic way. And so that's one we're still working on.
Mm,
And I think it's a combination of scaffolding and accountability as well. So that we need to be going in and saying, look, this is what we heard,
yeah.
or this is what we didn't hear, and to bring that into consciousness.
So you go through and do a walkthrough, you observe what's going on, and then you have a feedback conversation with so you've created a culture where that's quite normal in your school to go and share
Well,
what.
but having said that, the last few years with COVID and whatnot, we haven't really done it. So we're aware that we need to get back to doing that, to be having learning conversations focused on those things. And we've got three annual goals. One of them is giving practical effect to Te Tiriti o Waitangi. Second is accelerated learning, particularly in the junior school. And then the third is making sure that our leavers have meaningful pathways.
Mm,
And so with our middle leaders, I'm asking, so what are you doing in your departments to realise those goals? And we're wanting to coach them to be working with the teachers in the department. So what are you doing in your classroom to realise these goals? And what support do you need? And, how do we share what we're learning, what we're doing, so that our students are getting the best of that?
You mentioned something really important, this idea of scaffolding and baby steps, not setting people up to fail. Because for many teachers, they might be totally new to what Kahikitea or some of the nice aspirations, in Aotearoa, we're good at putting out great ideas, but it doesn't always necessarily land with great action because most people don't know what Māori success as Māori looks like and things like that. So I like that idea that you're taking multiple little steps with some accountability loops in there, checking in, and not in a moralistic negative way, but in a what are we doing, what is working, what isn't working, and then what next. It's not brain science stuff, really, is it? It's very
No.
human centered, really, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, we want to model the practice with our staff, our kaiako and kaimahi, that we would want them to use with our tauira, our akonga.
Yeah.
So it needs to manaki them.
Have you had any pushback? Because I've been working in a school recently that is really addressing some of the the big R, racism in the teaching and pedagogies of the school, and they've had some teachers leave who became very defensive, did not believe the data we were generating from the young people, from their discussions, from their sharing, and they said we're over it. They left, and the principal talked about how these teachers who left were actually great teachers, but obviously weren't cutting it and were racist in that they were making fun of the kids. They weren't giving the Māori and Pacifica kids any. They were giving the Pākehā kids more time, describing concepts, giving them the space to explore. Whereas for the Māori and non-Māori, the Māori and Pacifica kids, they didn't have that opportunity to go deep and weren't given the opportunity to explore things further. So some of those teachers left. And I guess that's part of the moral imperative, right? Like to actually go, we don't want that kind of the put downs, the making fun of, the inequitable way of teaching happening in our school. Because some teachers and principals tell me, we want everyone to be on this together, but then when there's a bit of shaking that goes on, they kind of go, oh, we don't want you to leave, so we'll just stick with what we've got.
Yeah. Well, and I think as school leaders, we've got to recognize that, sometimes when you change the direction, whatever that means, some people may decide it's not for them. And pai ana. And it gives an opportunity when we're recruiting for replacements for us to explicitly say, and this is one of the things we do, and when we're advertising, one of our primary goals as a school is to give practical effect to Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And we have a question in interviews about Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And if they talk about the 3 Ps, we're going, oh, hang on.
Yeah.
So, so I think it just means that we're wiser about those that we allow to join our kaupapa. And, one of the things that we've consciously done as a leadership team and with board support is recruit Māori and Pacifica kaiako and kaimahi where possible, to the extent now that I think about 45% of our kaiako are Māori, have Māori whakapapa.
Wow.
And a little bit more than that with our kaimahi, with our support staff. And that just means that our 50% Māori tauira population see themselves reflected in the staff. And it means too that when we're having conversations about racism and the impacts of colonisation, you don't have the lone Māori voice in the room saying that happened to me, and everyone else saying no. So yeah, it's about being strategic.
Yeah, so strategically hiring, being clear about what your vision is up front, having the discussion, and then weaving it through the school from board all the way through, or from the other way, whānau all the way through. That's what I'm hearing too.
Yeah.
It's a two-way,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Well, the whānau representatives on our board, we've got 8 members and I think 5 are Māori, which is great. It makes my job a lot easier.
Yeah.
Because of the understanding that they have for what we're trying to achieve with equity.
Bring that to the table, so to speak.
Yeah,
and even within that, you get a spectrum. Most boards are pretty dynamic, can be pretty dynamic places. Oh, well, we're coming up to the end of our time, Mr. Fabish. I just wanted to ask you, with the studies you're currently doing, where do you think the next kind of step is, or what do you think, what are you seeing as next in relation to Te Tiriti leadership in schooling? What are you feeling, or what's interesting you at the moment, and what are you wanting to explore at this point? And we know it'll change over time, but just at this moment, what are you thinking of?
Yeah.
And what are you seeing and interested in?
So with my doctorate, I'm establishing a whānau rangahau comprised of a couple of hapu members, and I think at this stage 7 school principals, a couple of primary, and then the rest of us secondary principals from Ahuriri. And we're going to engage in wānanga over the duration of a year and use a change framework, the Mātauranga Māori change framework that put together to see if that's a smart tool that can help to help our principals and also our hapu members to feed in for things that they can do to give greater practical effect to Te Tiriti in their schools.
Awesome.
Mm.
Awesome. Has that been done before? I think I know the answer to this, but has that been done before, this kind of crew coming together, Robin, in a formal way like this?
I don't think so.
No!
Certainly the framework that I've developed is unique as well. So that's
Robin,
cool.
the lights just turned on right then. So he tohu tērā. Ka te rama.
Well, so long as the alarm's not going at the same time, it'll be safe.
Wow. Well, that's going to be fascinating to hear how that goes. I look forward to hearing that. And if people want to get in touch with you, Robin, how do they do that? What's the best way? Through who are interested in this work and your studies and what you're doing at the school? They can contact the school, I guess. And
I just go on the website. My direct email is on the website. People can get in touch with me through our school website.
Awesome. Oh, that's awesome. Well, kei taku rangatira, e kore e ārikarika ngā mihi ki a koe. Mō kōrero, mo enei take nunui nei o te mātauranga whānui, me te mātauranga Māori me pewhiara, te whakahono-hono, me te whakaaro nui kia tū te akonga I roto I tōna ake mana. I roto anō I tōna ake ahurea. Nā reira, e te tūmua ki tēnā koe. Robin, it's been awesome connecting with you and just hearing the snippets. Those are just snippets of what you're doing, and I'm looking forward to hearing more with your project and just in general, around giving effect to Te Tiriti. I'm happy you're not running away. I'm happy you're encouraging the discussions within your own local place and seeing what happens. Yeah, it's creative. Nā reira, tēnā koe, kei taku rangatira e mihi ana. You got anything you'd like to share with anyone before we we finish our recording.
Ngā mihi nui kia koutou e hikoi tahi kia tātou, ngai tātou te iwi Māori ni. Koena no iho. Mihi nui kia koutou.
Tēnā koe. Whanake, whanake, whanake. Kia ora, everybody. Thanks for joining us. And yeah, keep it wired. Kia ora.